And welcome to our 17th online gathering for congregational leaders across the country. This is sponsored by ELCA's coaching ministry. I'm Jill Beverlin. I'm the coordinator of coaching for the ELCA, and I'm one of your facilitators today. So as we begin, it's important that you know that this time is meant to be a safe and brave space for church leaders to bring the truth of who they are and how they're doing in this time. We are taking intentional steps to live more fully into God's dream for us. And these types of conversations are the crucible in which lasting transformation begins to take place. These last few weeks, our gathering has focused on the topic of racism and how we can more specifically move toward hearing the truth of this and be intentional about change and healing in this realm. While the unspeakable murder of George Floyd brought the cry of Black Lives Matter back into our awareness, other groups that have been victimized through the process of systemic institutional racism are also being heard with new ears. This week, our country celebrates the 4th of July. And most that live here would say this is a remembrance of our victory in our hard-fought independence from Britain. Yes, this is true. But what about the other realities that led to this triumph? What might this date represent for those that have been dehumanized and dispossessed from their land, forced to assimilate to the white European culture as colonization occurred? I offer these questions as a backdrop as Deacon Tammy Devine moves us to a time of centering and introduction of our guest speaker today.
Seems that we're really slowly starting to recognize how our choices are impacting one another. We've been awakened in this time of pandemic, of COVID-19 and racial injustice, that we are bound together. In the wise words of Chief Seattle, humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. A prayer that I would like to share with you today comes from the Lakota and probably several other Native communities and tribes. And this is the 4-direction prayer. I have an adaptation to it that was created by a colleague of ours that some of you are very familiar with, who served on the churchwide staff for a while, has since died, but Gordon Straw. And he's adapted a last section that I will share with you. So we'll do the 4 directions. The Lord be with you. We face east in prayer to you, Creator God. We remember the sun which rises and gives light to the whole world. It is the beginning of each day and the beginning of our lives this day. In this light, you dispel the darkness. Lead us, Creator, by the light of your wisdom. Thank you, O God, for all the ways in which you guide us. We're lost without you. Thank you, Creator, God of the universe. We face south in prayer to you, Creator God. We remember the warmth of the sun and all growing things. Let your warm and pleasant rays continue to fall upon us so that we may not stop growing in this life. Creator, you give us life. When we take food from the earth, our mother, we thank you for these gifts. Keep us from wasting them and help us to remember the needs of all our relatives so that everyone will live healthy lives. Thank you, Creator, God of the universe. We face west. In prayer to you, Creator God, We remember the setting of the sun and the day's end, reminding us of the setting sun of our own lives. We do not fear because death is another part of life in you, the beginning of a new day. We remember the thunder and the rain which comes from the west, filling the lakes, rivers, and streams. Without this gift, nothing is able to live. So the sun sets and darkness covers the earth, our mother. We thank you, O God, for all your gifts, especially the life-giving gift of water. Cleanse us of all that is evil and renew us once again. Thank you, Creator, God of the universe. We face north in prayer to you, Creator God. We feel your winds blowing upon us, the cool and gentle breezes of summer that take the heat of day away, and the harsh cold winds of winter that cleanse us pure as snow. In these winds, we learn patience and endurance. Oh God, we need your strength to help keep us strong in bad times as well as good. Help us to be patient and wait for your power to show us the way to go. We rely upon you, Creator, as we face the harsh and purifying winds of life. Thank you, Creator, God of the universe. We face ourselves in prayer to you, Creator God. We remember that before we were born, you counted every hair on our head, and you call us into relationship with you and all our relatives. We feel your presence in our lives. You've given each of us a calling in this life to see our relatives, sun and moon and wind, the winged ones, the two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, those who crawl, and those who are rooted into the earth. Help us not forsake this calling, thinking only of ourselves. We ask for your help, Creator God, God of the universe. Amen. Today we welcome Reverend Paul Andrew Johnson. He is a Wartburg grad who is serving as pastor of Lutheran Church of the Wilderness. And the Spirit brought together this congregation, this Native American congregation, and Pastor Johnson as they work together to work through the forms of shame that surround identity. Please welcome Pastor Johnson.
Thank you, Tammy, for that.
Thank you.
So, as mentioned, if you read my bio, I come to this calling and this relationship with wilderness kind of in an unusual way. So unlike most of my classmates who had calls, some of them before they even finished graduating with their degree, it took me 2 years, 2.5 years to receive a call. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I identify as a gay man, that this was something I could have obviously hidden through the call process, but chose not to, and decided instead to live authentically and openly. And while that meant that I was able to live as fully myself, it also came with a realization that I would be waiting for a call. And the surprising thing is I received 2 questions when people find out that I am a pastor of a primarily Native American congregation. The first one is, what made you want to be the pastor of a Native American congregation? Which sometimes I hear as, why would you want to do that? Most times I try to hear it as, "That's really cool. What made you consider that?" And the reality with that is I had no idea that's where I would end up. Jill and I actually had the privilege in 2015 at East Central Synod, Wisconsin's Synod Assembly that members of the Stockbridge, Munsee, and the Mohican community actually led the worship services for that Synod Assembly. And it was really great to be a part of that. I was in tears at several points through those worship services because they're just so powerful and so authentic to who they are. And I remember when Pastor Melinda, pastor before me, announced that she was leaving that call that summer, I believe that month. I thought, oh, that'd be so cool to end up there. And then it just left my mind for the next 2.5 years. So it was kind of as an accident. A colleague of mine, Reverend Brad Dockin, who was the dean of the conference, said, "Hey, Paul's been waiting 2 years for a call. Wilderness has been waiting 2 years for a pastor. I don't care what it takes. Just put them together and make it work." And it did. It was kind of surprising for all of us. And there was obviously the expectation of me, of what I would want for a call was, well, as a gay person, you're going to want an urban call with lots of people around, and you're going to want, obviously full-time and, something that's in a very liberal area. For wilderness, it's, well, you're probably going to want an older pastor that's got lots of experience, someone that's pretty laid back and easygoing and is able to take a slower pace because they weren't able to offer full time. So the synod wasn't considering either of us for each other, just thought it wasn't a good fit at all. And it ended up being amazing. I would be horrible in an urban setting. That's way too many people for me. I'm much happier out in the literal wilderness. My house is surrounded by the church, forest, a parking lot, and then more forests followed by a cemetery. So I am literally in the wilderness and I love it. So as far as, what made me want to do that, I just wanted to serve a congregation that was willing to have me as a pastor. That was my biggest goal, and wilderness definitely fits that bill. They have welcomed me fully as a child of God, as a man who identifies as gay, as a first call pastor, still wet behind the ears from seminary. And it's just been amazing. I never expected to have a call process, and they actually voted unanimously to call me. And knowing the struggles that I faced, I never thought that would happen. I was hoping, at least 70%, preferably 80 or more. That's what I've heard is, like, you really need at least 70, preferably 80 or more, and you'll be fine. And it was 100%. So that was awesome. Second question I usually get asked is, how were you prepared for this call? And again, that's an interesting thing because I didn't think I would end up serving a Native American congregation. But looking back, there were a lot of things that did prepare me. My identity as a gay man and that process going through was very instrumental in being able to relate on so many levels, because there's a lot of overlap with my experience and their experience, in that we've both faced oppression and being othered by society, especially by the church, that we've been welcomed in if we follow the rules, if we learn to act and speak and do things a certain way that won't make other people uncomfortable. So that's one of the joys of wilderness is you come as you are. You don't have to fit a certain norm of how you look, how you act, no matter what. As long as you're not actively disrupting others, you're welcome there. And even if you are disrupting, sometimes that's called for too. So that's been a really joyful experience for me, seeing, in addition to the oppression, the similarities of both of us have been called out and ridiculed for who we are, for things that we can't change about ourselves. I mean, I went into Shawano when I first moved to Wilderness, to their parsonage, and I was dealing with one of the folks at a furniture store, and he's like, "Where are you serving?" It's Church of the Wilderness. Oh, all those featherheads. And I was like, whoa, that's my congregation. And he's like, yeah, we get a lot of business from them because, they got all that government money and they like to just drop it here because, they don't have to work for their money, unlike you and me. And I was so upset and didn't know what really. I said, well, that's my congregation. And I ended up, that's the first time I went there, and I didn't buy anything. And I called up the owner and I said, this really bugs me. And he's like, oh, we'll talk to him and we'll get this sorted out. And I went in 2 months later and he was there, and attitude did not change at all. And so even though it's real convenient, I will not support an organization that is going to treat my people as second-class citizens. That's not who I want to support. And it's still something that surprises me, even in today's world, that there is so much negativity towards the Native Americans, that there is so much negativity towards the LGBTQ plus community. This is something that we face regularly, and we're welcomed in if we follow the rules, and that's not really being fully welcomed. It's being tolerated. And so yeah, a lot of mutual things that we found working together. One of the biggest joys that I have is their phrasing for God that they like to use, the Holy Spirit, is patamawas. That's their word they use. And what I love about patamawas is, one, it's in their language, so they're reclaiming their language. Two, patamawas is gender inclusive. It is not male or female. It is not one or the other. It is everything. It is, yeah, it's all encompassing. And I thought, oh, that's so beautiful that they recognize that God is not limited to one gender norm or another, but that God allows us to be who we are called to be, because that's who God is called to be. So again, I would encourage you also working with my congregation, with these amazing individuals. There have been things that I've realized about myself and colleagues in language that not even meaning to, that help kind of divide us. So some words to avoid. Obviously redskins, featherheads, things like that. Obviously derogatory terms. But then there's also, I don't think I've gone 3 months without seeing some sort of survey online of, what is your spirit animal? And It's like, well, I'm not Native American. I don't have a spirit animal. And that's something that I've heard, classmates and other clergy in the conference talking about, like, oh yeah, that's my spirit animal. No, it's not. That's cultural appropriation. And that's not okay. Or, if you're going to have a meeting, oh, let's sit down and have a little powwow. Again, there's a lot in that word that you don't understand. And it's not for just a generic meeting. A powwow is a sacred space. It's a celebration. It takes a lot. And it's something that we have to be mindful of as members in the church, that we are not using language that is hurtful to our siblings in Christ, that we don't use words even unintentionally, because it is exhausting. And we've heard that from our Black colleagues, that constantly calling out racism and racist words and stereotypes and everything is exhausting. And we need to do some self-policing. And that's something that I am guilty of, that I'm still struggling with and trying my best not to violate that. And then there's other things since joining this congregation that I hadn't even considered, things that really caught me off guard. And so the obvious thing, reading Exodus, right? As a white person, I'm like, yeah, I'm a part of a tradition that, we were kicked out of a land, and we were able to find new land and claim that. And didn't see that as problematic until I studied Exodus with Native American individuals that said, this is our land. We're not the Israelites. We're not the Egyptians. We're the people that they stole their land from. And so I recognized that, and yet it wasn't until I started working with Wilderness that I realized that not only am I not, part of the Israelites claiming this new land, not only is that not their identity, but as a white person, my identity shouldn't be with the Israelites. It should be with the Egyptians. We are the ones that are oppressing others, and this is something that we need to change our perceptions of, because that's not how they view this scripture too. And to see the Holy Spirit work wonders through that is amazing. So Jill mentioned the 4th of July as something that I think it's funny with even my family. They every Thanksgiving they're like, so when are you free for Thanksgiving? What day works for you? Because obviously the day of Thanksgiving won't work because you're leading a service. So, no, they don't have a service on Thanksgiving. They don't recognize Thanksgiving. This is the way they celebrate Thanksgiving is they give thanks that that turkeys are on sale at the grocery store. But this is not a day for celebration for my congregation. So if anything, it's a day of mourning. And as a white person, my job as pastor is to step back. And so I'm available Thanksgiving. But then they're still surprised that I'm not available on Christmas. But also 4th of July, Independence Day. Jill caught me off guard with that when she asked me, because I'm like, we celebrate, we have fireworks. We don't have a 4th of July worship service, but we do have fireworks, and I haven't heard anything negative. And then it got me thinking of, well, this is my context, and in this community, that's not something that's harmful. Christopher Columbus Day, definitely a day of social justice in my community. Of this is this is Indigenous Peoples Day. This is not Christopher Columbus Day. All those major holidays that are uplifted are mourned by my community. And this is something that, you know, still catches me off guard. And the realization of Independence Day, how ironic that is, that this is supposedly the land of the free because of the brave, and yet this is stolen land. This is land that belonged to my people before any of my ancestors were here. And so this is a day that celebrates stolen land. And just be mindful of that as you go out and celebrate. I don't want you to stop celebrating with fireworks and whatnot. That's not the thing that we need to do. But we need to be mindful of that impact of those celebrations and raise awareness as well. Because as a white person, I have a voice that my congregational members do not always have. As a lot of heterosexual individuals in my congregation have a voice that I don't have as a gay man. You know, when they welcome me as a gay man, that's something that I can't do. I can't create that space of welcoming. And so I ask you to do that as well. So yeah. Jill, do we have time for questions? Okay. So let's see.
Yeah, if we can take about 3 minutes just for question and answer before we go to breakout rooms, that would be great. So go ahead and unmute.
Paul, this is Carol Schultz in San Diego, but a native of Wisconsin, so it's great to hear from you. I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned cultural appropriation. Part of my journey has been to learn to appreciate some of these things, like the concept of a spirit animal, without necessarily claiming it. But how do we do that in a way that enriches our lives without being insensitive?
So I have, that's a really great question. I had a friend that I lamented on that too. I'm like, you know, how do we uplift that there are characteristics that we identify with in others, and how do we use language that isn't oppressive and hurtful to another culture? And the friend that I was speaking to is a huge Potterhead, so Harry Potter fan, which with the trans community, that's a whole new ball of wax now. But she said, well, instead of your spirit animal, that can be your Patronus. You know, that's the symbol that you identify with in fighting the evil and darkness of the world. So finding different language, recognizing when we do say things that are hurtful, finding a different way of saying that. I still struggle with that in other regards. It still pains me, but sometimes my response, if I don't like something, is, well, that's lame. And no, that's horrible language. You know, that's dismissive of those with disabilities. So, you know, even for me, just because I'm gay doesn't mean that I'm not faulty of those same things. But just being aware of that, and when you are called out, my first response is to again want to justify it of, well, I'm not being oppressive and I'm not trying to cultural appropriate, but instead just say, you're right, I'm sorry, and I'm trying to do better. So, good question.
Thank you for that great question, Carol. And I'll point out that Carol is one of our coaches, so she's trained to ask really good questions. So I left that Paul named it as such. So looking at where we're at on the clock, I want to make sure that we're giving our participants plenty of time to really chew on this great information that Paul has given us, the narrative. Thank you for sharing your heart. Man, and your truth. You humble all of us by sharing that, and thank you for that. I hope that we can take this lens into our breakout rooms and really think about our truth. What's resonating with you from what Pastor Paul has shared? What connection points do you see with the community that you currently journey with? And as always, our abiding question: what's the next most faithful step that God might be asking you to take in this arena? So Jason's going to move us to our breakout rooms. As always, I invite you to use this time as a safe space for you to share, for you to simply listen, or to simply be, whatever you need. And so with that, I will bring us back, or Jason will bring us back a little before the hour, and we'll unpack themes while keeping the confidence of our small group partners, and then move to a final blessing. But thank you again, Pastor Paul, for your time. And you'll have to click the join button in order to move to the rooms. So thanks for moving us, Jason. Oh, wonderful. So welcome back to the large room, everyone. Jason, you're stuck controlling breakout rooms. That was the first time I got to go to a small group, and I loved it.
Perfect. Fun.
Yeah, so it's fun. So I'm wondering, we do have some time to unpack a little bit the themes that were surfaced in our small group discussions. So again, really stressing the importance of keeping the confidence of your small group buddies. What are some themes that were lifted up in your time together? And I see some are already putting them in the chat room. If someone wants to unmute and share, I would love to hear directly from you.
Jill, I'll share. Pastor Janice Hawley here in Creve Coeur, Missouri. We had not enough time, but we had some really great depth in terms of naming some of the things going on and what people are working with in terms of their connections. How white supremacy is functioning and how we continue to see effects of maybe dehumanizing people of color, and how important it is to continue to hear story and hear background of where people have come from and what they experience. Also to just come alongside and understand one-on-one and what and how to help people open up and speak those stories. Also talked about sometimes when the church in the community is maybe the Black church or the church with more people of color, then they experience a lot of white churches coming in and for a moment in time want to help, want to do something, and sometimes there's just some pushback because it feels too much like we've gotten our consumerism feel-good moment, you know, that white savior complex gets lived out, and people in churches at times really say, no, enough. It is working the way that it really truly needs to work. And so again, how do we, in terms of the broader community, how do we help and how do we gravitate towards people of color leading, maybe being in the pastor's role, being able to follow their rules instead of following the white rules of whatever's acceptable. So those were some of the connections that we had talked about. And thank you to the group I worked with today.
Wonderful. Some great launching points were lifted up there. Yeah. How about another group?
I would like to understand what she means by following their rules versus white rules. And whose rules are you following? And who determines whether they're your rules or white rules? I don't know, for some reason I found that offensive. Black churches are Black churches and they have their own denominations and theology, including Lutheranism. So whose rules are you talking about? Are you talking about liturgical? You're talking about style of service, the way the music is played, that if I have a concert pianist who happens to be my organist versus a jazz pianist who happens to be my organist, are those the rules you're talking about? Are you talking about the rhythm of the service? Or are you talking, so I was I was offended, not slightly. I was offended by that.
Let me clarify. My intention was not to offend. It was just trying to help express what somebody said, that comfortably, a lot of times in the churches that the person served, everything was okay being a leader as long as it followed the white, those members' rules, if you will, or the way that was protocol in that church. Having others follow when it is a person of color in leadership position, or following the way in which maybe the Black music, the Black liturgy, and that kind of thing is less comfortable for others to let that person of color lead. So that was the clarification. Does that help?
No, I think it made it worse. I think white privilege is showing, and I'm still offended. I'm Black, and I'm a Lutheran pastor, and I served all white congregations, and whoever came before me or after me was still Lutheran, and they still served the same congregation. And just because I was Black did not mean I changed the liturgy. I apologize. There is someone strange at my door.
Yeah. So thank you for owning how this conversation makes you feel. I think that that's part of us creating a safe space, is being able to own how we feel. And I want to clarify that I hear, from my vantage point, not being a part of that conversation, I hear Pastor Janice simply reflecting to the larger group a theme that she heard lifted up in her small group. And if I can offer my own interpretation, that that maybe this was just an example of a lens, and maybe it was an example of an unhealthy lens that was being lifted up through which things were happening. And so, with that, I will leave my own personal inflection of how I heard Pastor Janice's story, and how I took that into my understanding, and that we can learn, and hopefully we are moving toward what Pastor Rochelle was offering to be her truth and her experience. And this is part of the struggle, friends. This is part of wrestling with it, because there are things that hit us and offend us, and there are things that make us uncomfortable, and things that are awkward. And so I really want to respect the different perspectives in the room, and I hope that unpacking has been helpful with that. Yeah. Pastor Paul,
may I say something?
Oh, yes, please.
Janice compiled what she said from my comment and from someone else's comment. And one of the things that, not being offensive or anything, or trying to be offensive, I don't think that even people try to be offensive. One of the issues I had in my church during this pandemic time in doing music through Zoom is that at one period I picked all the songs, and I picked a few hymns. I had hymns in every Sunday, and somebody had mentioned that they just wanted to do traditional hymns. They were traditional hymns, but they came out of the This Far by Faith hymnal, the African American hymnal, which they're not familiar with. So they just automatically assumed that I just was trying to throw other stuff in the thing. And a lot of times it's not about being white or Black, it's about what we're comfortable with and what we know. But the thing is that a lot of times that comfortableness has a lot to do with it being white and Black, or white or Black, even though we don't quite feel that way or know that that's the issue. And so a lot of times when a Black person is up for a job as pastor of a white congregation, a lot of congregations will not pick that person because a lot of white people have problems with serving under a Black person, even though they would say they're not prejudiced or they're not racist, but they just feel that things are going to change too much, and so they wouldn't want to do that. So I just wanted to kind of bring that on a plane a little bit.
I'd like to add into that, because I came in to serve a Lutheran church as a Presbyterian minister, and I got a lot of that, well, you've got to do it our way, and real difficulty feeling accepted at first in that congregation, because my style was a little looser, not quite so strict, and you've got to step here when you go towards the communion table, and you've got to do this exactly that way. And I do like syncopated hymns, and they didn't like that either. So yeah, I ran into something very similar, just being a Presbyterian minister in a Lutheran church at first. Yeah.
Yeah, and sharing these different lenses of perspective are really important. And again, I want to honor that we have a variety of experiences, and it's important for us to have a safe space to wrestle with these things. As I said in the beginning, this is the crucible in which transformation starts to happen. In order to unpack this, to own honestly, this is how it feels. How do we live more fully into our identities as children of God and participate fully in the way that God has gifted us to be partners in the mission of loving and healing the world? What does that look like in the midst of all this wrapped together? So I really honor all of the conversations that have happened, the sharing, Pastor Paul, especially your vulnerability, your authenticity in sharing your truth, your story, the lovely congregation that you serve. I wish that they could be on to do a prayer for us with the drums, because your life would never be the same again after experiencing that. That was one of my most sacred moments of my life, was being a part of that at that Synod Assembly that Pastor Paul talked about. Next week, we're going to continue the conversation with another voice from the Native Indigenous community. Vance Black Fox will be our guest speaker. And so watch for the invitation. Thank you for the thumbs up. You'll hear a little bit more about him. Tammy, Deacon Tammy Devine, I invite you back into our space to close us out. I want to also acknowledge that we are after time, but this was rich and important discussion. So thank you.
Let us pray. Compassionate One, you hear the cries of the world. We are grateful to you for showing us how to be with those who suffer. Thank you for your bountiful kindness offered to our world through the people of selfless endeavor. How grateful we are that we can join them in being your loving heart and hands. We go forth with expanded gratitude and renewed inspiration to be a compassionate presence. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'll stay on, and we'll be here for continued conversation for those that still have some more unpacking to do. God bless you. Have a great and safe rest of the week. We'll see you next Wednesday.
So that wasn't as scary as I thought it would be.
That wasn't as scary as you thought it would be? Yeah? Tell me more.
Oh, I always get nervous when I'm asked to speak. God knows why I became a pastor.
I think you did great. I think you did great. Yeah. I know that the sharing time I was involved in was rich and full of possibility. And I think even that exchange that happened, that's an honest exchange, right? And I think that we need to not always feel like, oh, we have to see everything the exact same way. That's one of the things, training as a coach in the area of conflict, that's what we are taught to acknowledge, that conflict is nothing other than two opposing views sitting at the same table, right? I mean, Joanne, you're a training partner of mine. Joanne and I present together a lot, and she's heard me say that several times. And if we, what difference does it make if we can acknowledge that these are two just very different views, instead of I'm right, you're wrong? How does that change the conversation? Yeah, and it opens the possibility that, gee, there's something that I can learn. And maybe my conversation partner can feel the same way. And then from that, this creative truth can grow out of that. I'm committed to that kind of conversation, friends. I just absolutely am, because I think that that is the way forward.
Yeah. In our small group, Paul, it was mentioned that what we felt from you were two things: honesty and humility. And Jill, the way you wrapped it up at the end with your attitude and your words, your actions, I thought was a perfect reflection of that. That yes, we are different. So in a sense, we accept that we don't always accept each other. We accept that we will be different. And from that viewpoint, then we can come closer together. And I thought it was perfect, Jill. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah. Zach, had we had more time, I would have invited you to speak, because you come with a lot of experience from an indigenous population that, I mean, very geographically is removed, right? And I just think that you could speak to just a completely different level to this discussion.
Yeah, you know, I did like the exchange at the end, because one of the things we were talking about was the examination of power and how language reflects that. And without being intentional with our reflection on use of language, you know, it's easy to be in the dominant culture and be disrespectful without intending, but just to move through life and not realize the hurt that you cause others. Because we had talked about the accompaniment model, but then we also went further and talked about, you know, how to be good guests and how to be, you know, gracious hosts, and also to evaluate the power, because you can be a guest and still have more power. And isn't that sometimes the old method of mission, where people come in and even though they're the guest, they're telling other people how to live a life or to pray to a God or however. And, you know, the hurt and the pain that comes with some of that overstepping. And so I just, you know, we had a pretty robust conversation about some of those issues and some of the questions. How do we gauge things? How do we do that evaluating? How do we build the relationships and build those bridges across cultures? And some of it is sort of the exchange, which is to be open to the fact that we see things differently and to sit there long enough to hear those voices, because if not, it's just easy to go back to our world of tribalism and just say, well, you know, this is just the way I want it to be and this is where I'm comfortable. Because I think it's like Pastor David said, we're comfortable because change can be difficult, but if you have the relationship, then you can change together, and you can hold hands while you walk a different path. But until you have the relationship, it's easier to just try to stay comfortable. So I'm grateful for the forum and the opportunity to be a little reflective and you know, to live into this. So thanks, Jill, for everything you're doing with this.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. I appreciate everything that you've just shared. And I wrote down the examination of power and use of language, and that how that connects. That's so important. Yeah.
And I just want to, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I wanted to say, and I'm sorry I was interrupted. didn't get to finish. I have always advocated for people to have conversations, particularly pastors, that we're so used to being in mono groups that I challenge my cohorts to, like, who are your friends? Who do you meet? I mean, if we only ever have conversations with the same people that we know and have known, we do not grow. That I challenge everybody to look at your list of, I do that to my parishioners. If your friend list of the people that live in the same town, go to the same schools, work in the same jobs, you have known through high school, you have known through college, how do you understand diversity? How do you understand the cultures or even the influence that other people may have in your life? And then how do you learn to value them if you don't know they exist? And so there is power in how we use words and how words are used for and against us. And if we don't look at the possibilities, I come from Pennsylvania, and I always tell people I'm an indigenous Pennsylvania. I was born there, raised there, schooled there, graduate school there, seminary there. And my first call was in the Virgin Islands. Now, I want to tell you that even though it was a multicultural congregation, and there was everybody from native St. Thomians to the Danish, to the English, to the French, to the Swedish and the Germans and the African Americans in one congregation. And we spoke English, but we didn't speak the same language. And that's when, and I may have used a phrase or a word and people may have been offended, or some people found it funny. So learning the power that a pastor has on using words is very, very important. And so and I apologize if I I wasn't angry, I was just disappointed that as clergy, we still don't always understand that our perspective is based on what we know. The world has gotten smaller, and so many things that we do now cross cultures, whether we wanted them to or not, and we have grown up into a world very diverse from where it began. And so that was one of the things I just wanted to, we have to continue. And this was a wonderful conversation. I truly appreciated it. And I agree that we should have more, but I think that in order for us to grow, we need to take the conversations out of a safe space and put them into a real lived space, a space that is somebody's life every day. And learn to have those conversations, because I may grow with this group, but that doesn't help my congregation if I can't take it out and relate it and live it with them.
Yeah, and Pastor Rochelle, that's exactly the question that we ask. So what's your next most faithful step? That's exactly what we hope to be teeing up, that here in this space, we make a covenant that this is safe space for us to talk out just what you exemplified by owning how the discussion was making you feel. You were showing us how this can be a safe and brave space. And then just think of all the learning that's happened for everyone that listened to that unpacking of that conversation. And now with that modeling, they can take that to their community and start living that out in a place where maybe not everyone's making that same commitment for it to be a safe and brave space. I know my experience in faith community hasn't always felt completely safe. And to enter a conversation that could be seen as sensitized could be very dangerous, emotionally and professionally, in all those ways. So thank you for that challenge, because that's exactly what this is meant to do, is to tee us up so we can enter a space that feels, so the ripple effect can happen. I guess I'll leave it that way. to not make any
Yes,
assumptions
yeah.
about other people's environments. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What other perspectives can we share today? Larry, I see you're unmuted.
I was just going to say there's differences even inside of cultures. I mean, Pastor Rochelle and I know each other, but I mean, I came from California, she came from Pennsylvania. We have different perspectives, even geographically from where we grew up. All that stuff is a part of our, one person may celebrate one thing, somebody else may celebrate something else. But it's, again, kind of like what Paul was talking about, Pastor Paul was talking about earlier, and Pastor Rochelle, which is we just come at things differently. And basically we're unique to that, and you have to get to know that unique person, because that's a unique person you're trying to get. Don't stereotype, just because of what I look like, because I'm a big man, or because I'm black, or because, let's find the common, and then let's build a relationship. What would you like to be called? Is it Larry? Is it Lawrence? What's your favorite food? Don't assume it's one thing when it could be something else. I mean, you get to know me as a person. And that's really what our group talked about too, just the awareness and not assuming things, but really meeting people where they are, being kind of like what Zach talked about, not being a presumptive host or being a dominant guest, but being open to, having dialogue and conversation.
And pointing out, Larry, that not everything is universal is important. And I love that Paul pointed that out, that I kind of surprised him when I talked about 4th of July, because that happens to not be a pain point for the community that he journeys with. And so for me to just blanket that over the entire Native Indigenous population is inappropriate. And at the same time, I'm still okay that I've raised that question, because frankly, until my Native Indigenous friend first raised my awareness about that, I never gave that a thought.
Right.
Yeah, just it's another, I mean, for me, like I said, this is my time of huge awakening, my friends, and perspective, and I'm scrambling to keep up with all of it. And how does that change how I even interact and honor? I love that Deacon Tammy started us off by using the liturgy written by Dr. Straw. That was absolutely beautiful. And I think that I will be more intentional about seeking liturgies from specific ethnic ministries now, just because of my awakening. And it's something that I just never would have thought to do, to look beyond my, Book of Common Prayer, ELW. So.
And it's funny. I just think it's funny because I have every ELCA. I have the black, red, brown, black, red, green, two, cranberry, and I mean, literally, but all of that becomes important, and becoming non-judgmental, I believe, was a huge step. To take down those filters that we live in and we were raised in, to really suspend those filters and see who other people are and how other people are. So I truly appreciate. And Larry, you can sing to me any day, just so you know that.
Bless you.
That's where I do draw automatic conclusions about Larry, because he is a singer. That's just part of his fabric.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is all such wonderful conversation. You remind me of this ancient truth I heard somewhere, that one of the best ways to get to know something or someone is to first say, I don't know you. I don't know something. That's the true beginning of awareness and knowledge, is to say, I don't know.
Amen.
And think of the power structure, Jack, and what happens to that when you make that statement. You've relinquished a lot of your power by saying, I simply don't know.
Right.
let's not get, I don't want to get hung up on this word power, but to me, who is Jesus Christ? Okay, it's come up on our God. Who do you, who does George, who does Fred, who does Mary? And then he goes, who do you say that I am? See? And I'm not sure what is meant by relinquishment of power, but how can I be authentic? And how can I walk through this path on earth as a real human being until I am honest first with me? Who am I? If I can first try to understand me, I'm able to understand someone else. But there's a second truth. How can I really understand myself until I begin to understand you? I see both of them are true.
Yep. Amen.
Amen. And what did Jesus do to power? Jesus put power right on his head. Right?
Yeah.
Took that structure and went, whoop, guess what?
Jesus, the single most powerful human being who ever walked the earth, yet he is what? He's a Prince of Peace. He's a man of humility. He's one of kindness.
Yeah.
And doesn't that get back to perspective? Is like, what do we see as power?
Mm-hmm.
I think peace is as powerful. I think peace is powerful. I have been sorely struggling with my love of humanity in these past few weeks, and saying, like, wait a minute, where are all of the children of God? Where are these people that say, I see Jesus in you? And when do we begin to reflect that again?
Yeah. And that's a challenge. And I own that. I own that in my prayer groups, that there are, and again, I don't even say this facetiously, that there are some times that I am trying to pray for someone and I have to say, I guess I'm just going to have to let Jesus love you today, because I just can't find it. That's my flaw, my failing. And, and what does that look like? And frankly, the more I lean into that, the more I feel myself growing. It's like a snail's pace, but I'm growing there. And I think that again, the healing is going to come from the one-to-one interactions like this. It's not going to be we do need government policy to come alongside, but the real healing happens here in these crucibles of conversation. Yeah. Merle, you've been with us. What wisdom are you going to share with us, friend? Not to put you on the spot.
Oh, no, that's okay. In our group, we were talking about, we talked about how we are living in this great time of unveiling and peeling away of things. And a part of the peeling away is recognizing the things that we have appropriated that we felt. Okay, I began by saying I'm Merle Brockhoff. I'm from Weeping Water, Nebraska. I was a Weeping Water Indian in high school. I now live in Kansas City, where we have the Chiefs, and we do all this stuff, and we've appropriated these things that are deeply in our psyche and who we are, that are inappropriate, and we don't know where they came from, but they're really important to us in the iteration that we have put them into. And now, in this great time of unveiling and peeling back of things, we're beginning to realize where some of these things came from and how inappropriate we have used them. And that's a painful kind of process. Whenever you peel things back, there's pain, but it's a good process. So trying to keep space for folks in our group was really important. We're beginning to recognize things. I live in Jackson County, or Jackson County is just to the south of us here, with a statue of Andrew Jackson that they have now taken down because they're beginning to own what that president did to, and yet these people have these are folks for whom we've appropriated, appropriately so sometimes, a great deal of respect and power. They were president. They were all those things. How do we hold that together? And I said, this is a place where Lutherans have a gift to give, because we've talked about simul justus et peccator for an awful long time. You know, we have to claim both pieces. And we do that so beautifully sometimes with Luther, where we talk about what a irascible, you know, farting, belching, talking about, you know, cursing the Pope up one down upside and one down the other. We can't make a saint of him, but we sure do appreciate where the theology helps us end up in terms of understanding ourselves and our own inabilities or inabilities to live up to where we want to be. I think we have gifts to give that we just haven't figured out how to do yet. And so I really appreciate the conversation and the tension of the conversations, because it's in that tension, that both andness, that we find a way forward, I think.
Amen, friend. Love it. Love it. Joanne Larson.
I have to get myself unmuted here. Well, in the end, it really comes down to having a relationship with people. You know, when one of your kids marries somebody that you thought, oh my God, if I was picking somebody for you, this is the last person I would have picked. And yet, you know, you're going to have nice Thanksgivings and Christmases and see your grandchildren, and you know, you got to figure it out. So when you're forced through your relationship and your love of someone, you do all kinds of things you never would have thought of doing. And while this is a very difficult time for all of us, it is way more difficult for those who have been in the unequal categories for decades, centuries. And you know, for those of us in the predominant culture, however we got here, it is time to shut up and listen. And those of you who know me know I talk quite a bit, but I tend to be gotten a lot more quiet, because you really have to think about this stuff. It's like, what do you mean the Kansas City Chiefs? I like watching them, you know. But on the other hand, I appreciated the conversation today, and I appreciated the spirit in which it was held, in a struggle to try to understand what we're saying to each other, because words do matter. They really matter.
And I want to invite Ann to speak in a minute, and I see that Myra dropped off before we could call on her, but Joanne, to your point, Paul's sharing set the stage for that. Yep. Paul's story, the truth of who he is, his journey. I mean, it just exemplifies everything that we're talking about. And at the same time, to bring in Merle's that both and, it shows the impact that can happen on a larger community and how those two things come together, and especially come together with the help of the cross. And yeah, this really is the way forward. Anne, how about you? We would love to hear your words as well, please.
At the end of the month, I'm moving from Southern California to South Dakota. Completely different environment. And what this conversation has really brought to my mind is how much I need to listen to the people that I will be serving during my internship, and not making assumptions that what I know from my life here in California necessarily applies there. I don't know what I'm walking into. I don't know what the culture is up there at all. And I need to be able to sit and listen so that I can help myself to help them as we move forward in difficult conversations such as what we had today, and other difficult conversations around other issues that I may not even have a clue exist. And I won't know unless I sit down and listen and enter into a relationship with them.
Yeah, well, God bless you in that transition. And I have sent 3 different mission teams to journey with the Lakota people in South Dakota. And I wish I could go back and do all 3 of those trips differently, because I realize how upside down and Jack, I'm going to use that word, the power structure was in that, and what we went to do. And I think that at the end of the day, the people that engaged, it really did come down to relationship, and the people from our congregation really wanted to learn about and just build relationship with those people. But at the same time, there was that sense of the more resourced coming in and pouring down on, and I wish I could go back and change that. Yeah, I guess that's enough said there, and I'll be anxious to chat with you more, Anne, after you've been there, just to hear about how it's going, and yeah, the cultural learning that you will go through there. Yeah. So Paul, wrap us up. What final words do you have for this group as we go on with the rest of our week?
Well, so actually, Jill, to your comment about wanting to do things differently, just I couldn't help but think of, I think it's Maya Angelou, do your best, and when you know better, do better. That's the sentiment I've been trying to hold in my ministry, and with all the social justice, racial justice, gender justice, all the justice issues, is recognizing I'm going to mess up. When I'm trying to do things better, there are going to be times when I royally mess things up, and yet it's even worse if I don't even try to change. So I think that's the most uplifting thing for me is, again, going back to our relationship with Christ. Looking forward to this Sunday. I actually did the devotion for today on our Romans reading from chapter 7 of Paul reminds us that, the things we want to do, we don't do. We cannot do what we want, but we do what sin tells us to do. And that harmful cycle of, really wanting to do better and yet not. He says, wretched man that I am, who's going to save me from this horrible cycle? And the answer is Jesus Christ. And I think that's the most uplifting thing that I can remind myself with is even when I fall short, that through the grace of God, there are those that are going to do better than I am, and I stand on the shoulders of those before me who tried to do their best, and by today's standards have fallen short. That's one of the things that I love is that God doesn't hold in one position. God is always on the move, and we just have to do our best to try and keep up. So
wonderful. Thank you. And I moved a document, and I realized I did not call on my friend Janice. Janice, what else do you want to share with the group as we say goodbye to one another?
Keep breathing.
Keep breathing. Thank you.
Yeah, and I was reminded the other day that in moments when Rochelle, when you were challenging what I was saying and how I was saying it, in that moment, stepping back, it's painful, but it's also a time to just keep breathing in and know that the Spirit's with us all, and to count on that, because we will fall short every time, right? Over the years, we know that. We will never be what we can be. And thank goodness God doesn't work in a works righteousness way. So I'm giving thanks for that today, right? But Rochelle, I would like to talk with you more sometime and learn a little bit more about our conversation from your perspective. Okay?
That's fine. And next week I'll have a different machine so that I have a video. I apologize for being anonymous by way of the screen, but yes, by all means, I'm pretty much, I'm in the book, as they say.
Wonderful. And Rochelle, because you were on via phone, you maybe didn't see in the chat area that Zach offered that he was, what did it say? He was raised outside of Reading, Pennsylvania, and he wanted you to know that. So our friend Zach, who now lives, he serves as the counsel for the Synod of Alaska. And he lives in, how can I forget? What is the capital of Alaska, everybody?
Juneau?
Nope. Oh, well,
Anchorage?
He lives in Anchorage. Thank you. He lives in Anchorage.
Yes.
Anchorage,
yeah. Okay.
I'm very geographically illiterate.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I agree with that. I was born in southwestern Pennsylvania, Uniontown, and then I went to school at Carnegie Mellon, and I kept moving further east all the way to Philadelphia, then back to central Pennsylvania. So as I say, I'm an indigenous Pennsylvanian now living in Florida. And when I tell you there is a cultural shift in the way church is done and the way church is understood, they are not two peas in the pod. One is a green bean and one's a chickpea.
That's a really great analogy. So friends, thank you. Know that each of you are bringing a piece of the kingdom. To just build on what Janice said, you know, we're always becoming until Jesus comes again. And so I thank you for every piece of the kingdom that I see coming through each of you and the way you reflect Jesus Christ to me and to the world. So thank you. Thank you again, Paul. What a joy. When COVID isn't a threat anymore, let's get together. And I want to come and worship with you when that's available again.
Heck yeah, we're gonna have a big old party when it's possible.
Heck yeah. Okay, all right, friends. God's peace. Yep, sending
Peace be
love.
with you.
Blessings,
Okay.
everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, see you next Wednesday.